Another news, Labour analyst John Botha's article Navigating the Evolving Landscape, seeking to offer insights on labour law changes in 2024. The article provides a thorough look at the imminent shifts poised to reshape organisational operations in the country. In this 2024 labour law forecast, Botha explores strategic foresight and adaptability guidance tailored for organisations with the hope of understanding the potential minefield of navigating labour law in 2024. John Botha, Joint CEO of Global Business Solution and Labour analyst, joins us now. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Good evening to you and the viewers. Thanks for having me.
So in your mind, what are the biggest changes that we're expecting within the labour law landscape, and the one that will have the most impact?
In my view, there are three key sort of trends that are unfolding this year, and a number of laws coming through the parliamentary processes. I think the one is to do largely with the whole digitization wave that we are in, deeper into the fourth industrial revolution. You know, we've had the POPI Act being promulgated. We also have the Cybercrimes Act. And of course, in addition to that, people's behavior needs to be regulated in terms of harassment, hate speech, and the like. So the hate speech bill is awaiting presidential signature, and organizations will be well advised to start looking at not just revisiting their standards of conduct, but also to change the behavior and to look at personal mastery when it comes to leading and managing with emotional intelligence. So that's the first area. The second big one, of course, coming through this year is the ARTO Act, which will have a massive impact on any employee who relies on their license to fulfill their job responsibilities. Employees will have to start disclosing their demerit points. Organizations might very well require them to go for rehab, or if their licenses are suspended, they might face no work, no pay, and potential dismissal. So those are two of the big three. And then the third one is the Employment Equity Act, the ministerial targets that were published by the Minister of Employment and Labour in the regulations for comment on the 1st of February. And that is going to have a massive impact on how organizations recruit, select, promote, and retain. So massive changes, policy impacts, and of course, along with that, they're going to have to make sure they're ahead of the curve because they cannot afford to be complacent.
So do you expect a major paradigm shift in terms of diversity when it comes to the Employment Equity Act? And we know that there's been a great deal of resistance around that. And I'm also just wondering, you're talking about the hate speech bill. Speaking of diversity, are we expecting real change, genuine change, when we talk about inclusion initiatives?
Someone once said you either see the light or you feel the heat. And I think what we've seen is organizations have generally been quite slow to respond in terms of, as I said earlier, their behavior. Behavioral change takes time, as we know. Each of us, I'm sure, have grappled with things in our lives we need to deal with. So the challenge has been not so much with the tick list, but the behavior underpinning the tick list. So in order to drive this message home, and to your point, the hate speech bill and the Cybercrimes Act take it a step further. It doesn't only hold labour law liabilities for organisations and for their employees, but civil and criminal charges as well. So you might find employees finding themselves being imprisoned or potentially even being fined for any forms of undermining of human dignity, which is a massive issue. And unfortunately, organizations are very poor in respect of capacitating people to be self-aware and to self-regulate before they just do something. And you see many CCMA and labour court cases where people have failed to self-regulate and suffered the consequences. So will it bring the change? Well, as I say, companies must either see the light or they're going to definitely feel the heat.
There are two things that obviously have a great deal there's been a great deal of interest on, and people have been watching it. The one is the national minimum wage. We understand that there's some changes that are expected there, but it's all about fair compensation while dealing with economic stability. And we know in this environment post-COVID, for a lot of people, especially those in freelance work or contract work, have found it very difficult to get fair pay. So talk to us about that.
I'm very pleased you've raised that. The national minimum wage, as you well have alluded to, has been published. The increase from the 1st of March this year is an 8.5% increase. So that was arrived at with inflation running, CPI running at 5.1% in November last year, and then an additional 3% on top of that to take it to 8.5%. And interestingly, the National Minimum Wage Commission comprises 12 commissioners. 8 of the 12 voted in favor of CPI plus 3, which takes us to an 8.5% increase. And 3 of the commissioners just voted for CPI. But the reality is, and you've touched on it, the vertical income gaps are massive in South Africa. We probably the most inequitable society in the world when it comes to the Gini coefficient. So I don't believe the minister had much of an option but to give a well above inflationary increase. Now, when it comes to platform workers, vulnerable workers, people that are delivering and not really being treated as employees, the other bill coming through Parliament is called the Employment Services Amendment Bill. And that bill will extend protection to what we've started becoming called platform workers. So it's your sort of Uber drivers, your Checker 60, your Taker lots, the Dash, those kinds of employees are being brought within the legislative framework of protection. So organizations are going to have to be extremely careful in how they design their workforce models.
And one, of course, that we've also been watching very closely is the pension fund, the two-pot system. And pardon the pun that I mentioned this next one in the same sentence. So we're talking about the Cannabis for Private Purposes bill. That's also expected.
Yeah, I'm just smiling because that bill is a very interesting bill, because what it does is it legalizes, for example, you carrying 100 grams of dried cannabis on your person in public, but obviously we're out of sight. And organizations will have to revisit their substances and cannabis policies, because employees would have to be made to know very clearly they cannot enter the workplace possessing cannabis, even though outside of the workplace they can carry these 100 grams of dried cannabis. And interestingly, the Cannabis for Private Purposes bill also talks about how many plants you are allowed to keep in your dwelling, dependent on your numbers of cohabitants. So, people that stay with you, they almost work on a per capita system. Now, all of these changes, you can just imagine, have got impacts on policies within organizations, a redrafting of the boundaries that are acceptable or not acceptable. And as I said, I really believe organizations need to pay much more attention to not only drawing the boundaries, but to allowing their employees to be capacitated to regulate themselves and to think things through. Because when their emotions are high, and we've just seen now it's voting time, people are struggling financially, there's crime, there's unemployment, when emotions run high, it disconnects our rational thinking. And that amygdala hijack often results in people conducting themselves in an irrational or emotional way. And what we need to do is we need to capacitate our employees, and especially our leaders who've got a very big impact, to manage themselves with emotional intelligence, just to reflect, just to allow those neural signals to get to the rational part of our brain and not just respond from the amygdala. And I think organizations would achieve a lot more harmony, diversity, and fewer labor disputes if they actually paid attention to that.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, labor analyst John Botha.